Iacob Gagné-Montcalm. I'm a PhD student in economics at the University of Manitoba. And today I'm going to talk about ongoing projects. There's still a kind of a draft that I'm working with Simon and others. So the goal is to kind of create a conceptual framework to understand better the political economic structure of Quebec. And kind of the main issue that we try to answer come from, not specifically the state, but that kind of state, that most recent proposal for democratic economic planning kind of focuses more on general principle and mechanism. It don't really look at the way the provisioning system of specific industry is structured. So how kind of production, distribution, and consumption is structured in specific industry. So in order to kind of respond to that issue, what we're trying to do is kind of look at the economy of Quebec from kind of a practical standpoint by looking at different data, using different data, but also kind of mobilizing different conceptual framework that kind of allow us to look at this data. So our goal is kind of to look at the different main industry in Quebec. So we had to start with one. The industry we choose to start is the mining industry. So on the left, kind of got a map of Quebec with the different mining in activity. And on the right, we got a graph kind of showing the amount, the share of GDP the mining industry represents in Quebec. So that's kind of the object of study. The first framework that we are mobilizing is the provisioning system one. So as you may know, provisioning system kind of reject that neoclassical aim at kind of demand and offer as a main driver of economic activity and kind of coordination, and rather kind of look at the ecological, technological element that compose the production, distribution, and consumption of specific industry. And so they kind of look at the continuous process aimed at transforming biophysical resources into goods and services that are in each provisioning system constrained by the consumption object they produce. And so provisioning system kind of allow us to look at physical element and social element of each provisioning system. So the first limitation that provisioning system kind of doesn't cover, but it's important while we're looking at a specific industry, is the idea that material stock and flow are quite important in a specific provisioning system. And so kind of focusing more on stock and flow in parallel to provisioning system kind of offer more theoretical, robust framework. And so in order to kind of respond to that first limitation, we look more deeply into social metabolism, and specifically the stock flow services kind of nexus. So the stock flow services nexus kind of tell us that there's a dialectical nature between the stock, the flow, and the social relation that surround them. And that kind of material flow kind of go throughout extraction, production, distribution, and consumption. And that dialectical nature exists at both the point of extraction, at the point of transformation, at the point of consumption, and also at the point of waste. And so, with that in mind, we kind of look at the interrelation between stock and flow, and how kind of material stock accumulates as a structure in order to mediate social practices. So with those two kind of starting framework, we can start to look at specific data in the mining sector industry in Quebec. So here we kind of get a few graphs of a different mineral, of both the proven reserve as well as the extraction that is made per year. But we can also break down to specific mineral. So here we kind of get the quantity of iron that is extracted and sold by both the society and the mine owned by the society. And as we can see, there's quite a variation each year. So that variation in the extraction can be due to different factors, such as new legislation, such as social contestation, worker strike, but also kind of a depletion of proven stock, which make it harder and harder to extract a mineral, and so necessitate more investment. So that's kind of the material and stock relation while we look at kind of the use value of the productive sphere. But we can also go to kind of the exchange value more in the conceptual sphere. So here we kind of got a graph showing the production value obtained by the different society in the mining sector industry, as well as the part of that production value that is captured by the state in income revenue and different kinds of tax. And we also got the way that investment and gross capital accumulation are interlinked. So on the left we got the gross capital formation, and on the right we got the mining investment. The mining investment covered both like new infrastructure, new road, new machinery, but also kind of the depletion of stock. So this is a first take at how flow and stock kind of are interlinked. Finally, we can also more dive deeper into the financial flow of the mining sector industry. So here we got a few graphs showing both the asset and liability of the extractive sector, but as well as the transformation sector, and also the asset allocation and how that allocation kind of distribute between investment, infrastructure, etc. So throughout the presentation, there will be quite a few of those kind of data coming from the Ministry of Finance of Quebec. It's good to note that this data is fairly lagged, so it's from 2012 to 2019. That's because of the legislative lag. But it kind of showed the first kind of step of that new mining boom in Quebec, and it will be interesting to kind of follow the data and see how it evolved. And so, kind of with that provisioning system, with that stock flow services nexus, and that first kind of look at the data, we kind of get a starting framework that look at both the socio-metabolic practices in a specific industry, as well as the political economic perspective. So on the socio-metabolic perspective, as we've seen with the data, we kind of get the way that material flow accumulated stock, and how kind of stock became a structuring element of provisioning system. But there is still kind of the political economic perspective that look at actor, institution, and power relation that take place in that provisioning system, and how those kind of actor institution relation interact and structure the specific provisioning system. And so to do that, you kind of need a framework that looks at class analysis. And so that's what we got here. So in a specific provisioning system, there's a lot of different actors, and each of those actors can have a specific role. And each of those roles have specific function, contribution, benefit, risk, and interest. So by looking more deeply into who are those actors in a specific provisioning system of the mining sector in Quebec, and what are their function, contribution, and interest, we can start to kind of flesh out the way their diverging interests kind of play, and how those diverging interests kind of structure different institutions and the provisioning system in place. And so we'll go more deeply into who are those actors in the mining sector in Quebec. So starting with worker, there's a lot of different data that we collect to look at the position of workers. So we can talk about union, we can talk about real salary. There's also kind of the tension in between workers, different class of worker, between blue collar and white collar. But I choose to kind of present that data that kind of contrasts both the profit share of the gross revenue, as well as the wage share of gross revenue. So we can see how kind of the share of wage and the share of profit contrast. And once again, that data is from 2012 to 2019. So kind of an interesting fact to note is that the net profit is below zero for those years. So it's kind of an investment year. So once again, it will be interesting to kind of follow those data. And then on the part of end user, the mining sector on both the extractive and transformation side is kind of oriented to the exterior. So we can see a graph of the international importation and interprovincial importation. So we can see there's a lot of interest stemming from outside actor on that part, so who use the product of that extraction. And then we also got the investor. Once again, the data is from 2012, 2019. But as we can see, there's a lot of paid-in capital, so the actual capital that are paid in by investor into action. And the red line is the retained earnings, so kind of the profitability of that sector during those years. So it's a specific point of time, but we can see the kind of bet that the investor made in at that time and kind of the relative position that the investor are in. So just that graph kind of tells us that the relative position and interest of investor at that time. And then we get the financial owner of the mining society in the mining industry in Quebec. So here on the left, we kind of get a graph showing if the society are multinational, if so, are they Canadian or not, and if they're just non-multinational, which can show us that there's a lot of pressure coming from multinational and a lot of pressure coming from international multinational. And on the right, we kind of get the production value of extracted mineral, but kind of ventilated by the country of incorporation. So as you can see, the bigger is still Canada, but then as we go down, there's a lot of tax haven and other big countries. So we got Luxembourg there, we got Bermuda there, but also United States, Australia, India. So kind of those two graphs shows there's a lot of international interest of financial owner in that sector in Quebec. Once again, kind of showing the same thing. It's the percentage of business conducted in Quebec by both the extractive sector and the transformation sector. Transformation sector kind of close to 80%, but extractive sector lower than 50%. So it's telling us that the society kind of have at least 50% of their activity on other provincial or other country than Quebec. Finally, another interesting factor in the financial owner and how that kind of position your interests is the amount of society in mind in the sector in Quebec. So as we can see, there's quite a few of both society and there's a few mine, which kind of tells us that there's a monopolistic standing. And Bedard and Pinot have studied that monopolistic standing specifically in the iron ore mining industry. And what they found is that this monopolistic standing kind of take place and allow those society to enforce power in the organizational power. And that power kind of take place on both the point of extraction as well as the structure of circulation. So that allows those society to kind of influence public policy, to control pool of labor, to monopolize access to crucial mineral, and to externalize costs. And then we kind of get the second biggest player, the first being the financial owner. We also get the community member. So we'll see later kind of the legislation in place in Quebec, but on the right is a map of the whole of Canada, and each red point is a mining claim. And then the kind of polygon we see are the unceded indigenous territory. So as we can see, there's a lot of overlap between the mining claim and the indigenous unceded territory. And once again, Bedard and Pinot kind of study this kind of tendency of the mining industry, mining society to overinvest in production capacity in order to maintain that monopolistic standing. And all of that investment in production capacity kind of translate into new investment projects, such as road building, railroad, pipeline, that are always kind of overlap and in contrast of the community member in place. So we kind of have that class analysis in the organization of the provisioning system allow us to look at the different interests of actors in this provisioning system. The thing that is lacking is the role of the state in that whole ordeal and in that provisioning system. So state is kind of undermined, but state is always a big actor in both legislation, but also in investment in infrastructure. And there's another framework, the historical materialist policy analysis, that kind of tells us that those different interests coming from actor kind of are mediated in the state as kind of a strategic site of conflict resolution. And the state kind of serve as a way to organize and translate into specific policy those conflicting interests and kind of force institutional compromise that way. And on the investment side, the graph on the right kind of tells us the amount of expenditure that is made. So like kind of direct investment made by the Quebec government in the mining sector industry. And so we'll look at an example of how this kind of legislation put in place to kind of mediate those conflicting interests translate into the mining sector in Quebec. So the mining sector in Quebec is mostly dictated by the Loi sur les mines. And the Loi sur les mines, for a long time, allowed pretty much anyone or everybody to acquire a mining claim. And that mining claim kind of grants free access to public land in order to explore that mining claim. And afterward, kind of grant free access to exploitation on that land. So in that sense, there was a direct clash between the interests of the financial owner and the interests in community and place. And those conflicting interests kind of had been translated into a new policy, which kind of took place into the Loi sur l'urbanisme et l'aménagement, which allow something which is called RCM, Regional County Municipality, which is kind of an administrative municipal level government, to identify the territories that were incompatible with mining activities, so for cultural, economic, societal reasons, which kind of grants a lot of more, it kind of switched the balance of power into the end of those RCM, which had in mind the claim and interests of the community and of the indigenous community. And then more recently, a few months ago, the Bill 63 was adopted, and the Bill 63 kind of once again pushed in favor of the community member. It kind of recognized all public land as, all private land as territory compatible with mining activity, and then the RCM kind of decide what to do with the public land by delimiting incompatible territories. And so as we can see, that's the way that the state kind of found a policy that encompassed all of those interests of the mining sector actor. So this here is a kind of a framework that we took from Planck that kind of it's a framework that kind of encompasses all of those frameworks. So we got the role played by the stock flow services nexus, the role played by the stock and the material flow, as well as the role played by the state. And that kind of allow us to, this framework and what I present kind of allow us to shed light on the specific institutional arrangements that shape provisioning system. And finally, I'm going to leave you at that kind of insight from a few authors that kind of argue that this way of looking at provisioning system kind of give tool to both kind of seek something else than profit maximization, as well as to being a tool to kind of reduce the use of resource. So it's kind of a need to look at provisioning system in that sense. And then there's also an interesting article. As I said earlier, we're still in the building part of that framework, so we're really interested in recommendation and insight from you. But Clara Dallaire-Fortier kind of look at the different accumulation regime in the mining Canadian sector. So that might be also a thing to integrate in the framework. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.